I think when you can't do what you're good at, you do what's important in life. And that's what I'm doing now. And I'm not making any money. But I'm making a difference in people's lives. And it's that connection for me now that is so important. I mean, I've had people say, if you could live your life without cancer again, would you do it? I wouldn't, David. Cancer has made me a better human being. And it's made me a better human being because of those connections.
Unlost Cause is a community that shares stories of individuals 40 and beyond who found the courage to reclaim their dreams and live without regrets. I'm David New, and I hope these stories help you find joy, purpose, and passion in a life true to you. I'm delighted to welcome Terry Tucker to Unlost Cause. He's a former NCAA Division I basketball player, a SWAT hostage negotiator, and now the founder of motivationalcheck.com. After being diagnosed with a rare form of cancer in his 50s, he chose not to suffer silently, but to inspire others through his mindset, message, and the 4 truths. Today, he helps people turn their pain into purpose and leads what he calls an uncommon and extraordinary life. Terry, welcome to Unlost Cause.
Well, David, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Yes. And so one of the things, before we rewind the clock and talk a little bit about your childhood, I always like to level set with the audience for them to get a background is, what is motivational check? Maybe you can summarize in like 3 to 4 sentences before we dive into the backdrop.
Sure. So Motivational Check is a company I started a few years ago that really is my speaking and my writing arm of what I do. I wanted to put it under an umbrella. I could tell you where Motivational Check came from, but that's a much longer story. But it goes back to my police days, my police academy days and things like that. So it was just a phrase that we were allowed to shout out if we were having a tough time in the academy. And the rest of the class would respond. We were the 84th recruit class with an 84, just to let the person know you're not alone, that we're all in this together. So when I was looking for a name for the company, Motivational Check came to mind.
Great. And so you've done a lot of amazing things, including being an amazing athlete to get a play at the D1 level. So why don't we rewind, what was your childhood like? How many siblings did you have, and the relationship with your parents, kind of the broad brush strokes?
Sure. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of 3 boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall, and actually went to the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina on a basketball scholarship. I've got another brother who's 6'7" who pitched for the University of Notre Dame, another brother who's 6'6" who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers and the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on, at the front of the church. But our 5'8" mother was the boss. It didn't matter how big, tall, strong we were. Whatever mom said, that's the way it went. And David, our parents taught my brothers and I the importance of family, of loving each other, of caring for each other, of supporting each other. Our entire childhood was sports. We played football, baseball, and basketball. And then we started to specialize as we got old in a particular sport. So it was always running, and my parents used to do what I call divide and conquer parenting, where, I'd have a game on Thursday night at 5:00 at this location, and my brother would have a practice on Thursday night at 5:00 at another location. So dad's going with me, mom's going with my brother. But Sundays were always set aside for family time. It was really the only time we could get together as a family and have a meal. And so dinner was always very special on Sunday because mom usually made a roast or something like that. We were meat and potatoes kind of people, and we got to sit around and just be with each other, which was kind of hard to do during the week.
Great. And then in terms of sports, were your parents both pretty athletic and participated in a lot of sports themselves growing up?
My dad was. My dad played high school basketball. He played basketball at a small college in Minnesota. And then he played basketball and baseball and football when he was in the Army. So sports was kind of a big thing. And like I said, I don't have any sisters. So it was all it was guy stuff. There were weights in the basement. Did you work out today? And my brothers and I have talked about this. If we knew back then what we know today about conditioning, about rest, about training and things like that, we would have been so much better athletes than we ever were, but we didn't know that stuff. And so we kind of did what our dad told us to do. And our dad coached us in some of the sports that we played in, which was also a big plus for us. We got to hang out with dad and stuff like that.
And what were some of the key lessons you learned, playing all these sports and then eventually specializing in basketball?
So I was very lucky. We spent a small amount of time in Columbus, Ohio, which is where Ohio State was. And when I first started playing basketball, I was like fourth grade. I happened to get on the basketball team with the son of the assistant coach of Ohio State's men's basketball team. And so, it was just luck. It was, because people, you're on this team, you're on this team, you're on this. And I got on the team with him. And so I got exposed early to Ohio State basketball. I went to Fred Taylor was the head coach and went to his basketball camp in the summer. And I just loved it. And basketball for me, so when I was 6'5" when I was 13 years old. So I had these, I was tall and skinny, had these great big ears that kind of would have rivaled Dumbo, from the Disney movie. And I had a size 14 shoe. And so I got teased mercilessly because of my appearance. And so a way to kind of overcome that for me was to play basketball. And it's one of those sports that you don't need anybody else to play with. You just need a ball and a hoop. And they were all over the place in the neighborhood where I grew up. And so it was something that the more I practiced, the better I got. And the better I got, the more I wanted to practice. And soon I was a student of the game. And to become a student, I think you learn so much being part of a team, how to be coachable, how to be a teammate, how to have ups and downs and how to deal with all that kind of stuff. Sports, especially team sports, taught me all that stuff. And then my dad was also very instrumental he was very supportive of us. And we would always go out and, shoot baskets with him or, toss the football or the baseball. And those are some of the fondest memories I have. You want to see a grown man cry? Show me the movie Field of Dreams. And at the end, hey, Dad, you want to have a catch? I'll cry that movie at the end of that movie all the time.
And then, so growing up, I see that through line that sports was a big deal. You learn a lot of amazing lessons. What was the role of academics, or was academics in the background? You're like, hey, I'm going to go pro and get paid playing this. Or was it like, I'm going to enjoy it. I know this ride's going to end. I probably won't go pro. So I'm going to also focus on academics. Like, what was the role of academics?
My brother and I were talking about this the other day, the one that was drafted by the Cavaliers. He played at Division II school and was an All-American 2 years in a row. And we were honest with each other. It's like, I went to college to play basketball. I hate to say that. The byproduct was I got an education out of it. And I mean, academics, don't get me wrong. My parents were always like, look, if you want to play sports, you need to maintain at least a C average in all your classes. You don't have a C average, you're not playing. And so, but it wasn't the pressure of, you need to get straight A's in order to play sport. So I don't think either of my parents, my dad went to college, my mom didn't. They were good students, but they weren't exceptional students. And sports was something that we were really focused on. And academics, I hate to say this, was secondary, but it was also important. And we went to a college prep high school and things like that. So we were put in an environment, an atmosphere where we were expected to learn. And, I took physics and chemistry and all. I wasn't taking, underwater basket weaving and that kind of stuff. I was taking, the hard courses that would prepare me to be successful in college.
Okay. So before we transition, we talk about college, you've done some amazing things. You went to academy, you played big time D1s on college basketball. Now you're entrepreneurial. Did you have role models in any one of those? Like, did you have a friend or family member that was a police officer or SWAT negotiator or entrepreneur that now that you look back, you're like, oh, maybe that person really did rub off on me or was instrumental in some of these chapters in my life?
I did. And I, you look at my resume, it kind of looks like a Super Ball went off in the room. It's just kind of banging all over the place. But there's a backstory. And my paternal grandfather, my dad's dad, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, he was shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories growing up that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So when expressed that interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps. My dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to live. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to live. And so when I graduated from college, my dad and my grandmother were both dying of cancer. And so I had probably my first big adult decision when I graduated. I could have said, hey, Dad, I know you're dying. Sorry about that. But I'm going to go do my own thing and blaze my own trail. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So understanding that backstory, my first two jobs were in business type of careers. And then at 37, made the major pivot in my life and became a police officer.
And then, so tell us about I know college recruiting for athletes is crazy now, especially with NIL. And so what was it like for you when you were getting recruited, and where did you decide to go, and what did you major in? Was it business, because that's what your dad wanted?
Exactly. Exactly. So recruiting today is so much different than when I was being recruited. Back then, it was the high school coach that had the kind of influence. And I was a pretty decent athlete. I played in Chicago. I played in the same conference with a guy by the name of Isaiah Thomas, who would go on to play at Indiana and then with the Pistons and is in the NBA Hall of Fame. And in college, played against Michael Jordan. And my youngest brother actually coached Jordan's two sons when they were in high school in Chicago. So it was a lot of letters. It was a lot of phone calls. And it was, there were no cell phones back then, or, no iPads. And so it was always, phone calls. And I had to make a decision. I still had to keep my grades up, but coaches were calling all the time at night. And so there was just a block that was like, okay, I'll take calls from this time. Mom and Dad, you answer the phone after that. I've got to study. And so I wanted to stay close to Chicago. I had a very serious girlfriend. All my friends were there. My family was there. And so I initially accepted an offer. I went on an official visit to the University of Toledo. Not a great academic school, not necessarily a great basketball school, but they were in the Mid-American Conference, and they were close to Chicago. My friends and family could see me play. They offered me a scholarship. I agreed to verbally. And then 2 weeks later, I received a call from the assistant coach, was like, not sure we have a scholarship for you. And I thought, oh, okay. And David, I was so naive and so I didn't understand any of this. And so I was like, okay. A week later, they called back and they said, we have a scholarship for you. I said, oh, okay, great. And it was my dad who kind of pulled me aside and he said, do you want to play for somebody who offers you something, then takes it back and then offers it again? And David, I was like, I don't know. I was kind of a dumb jock, I'm like, I don't know. Honestly, I was kind of a dumb jock. I didn't understand any of that. And I said, well, let me think about it. Let me sleep on it. I got up the next morning and I said, Dad, no, I don't. I don't want to play for somebody who doesn't have that kind of integrity. And so we sat down with the other choices that I had and just on a piece of paper, and, pros and cons of each school. And my second choice was the Citadel. And it was absolutely the best choice I ever made in my life. And I think that was kind of God working his little magic there and saying, no, yeah, it'd be great. But I went 1,000 miles away from home to go to college, and I was not ready. I'd never really been away from my family. A week at a camp, basketball camp in the summer, that was about the extent of it. So it was really my dad that kind of got me to look at the bigger picture and not just concentrate. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go play basketball at this place. So.
Because it does sound like you had a very close family with your brothers, these Sunday night dinners with your father, and then you'd also talk about your friend set. So when you choose to go 1,000 miles away, like some people want to get away from their family, other people do it a little bit reluctantly. It sounds like you're a little bit more in the latter camp. How you chose to react to it, was it homesickness, and then you got over it really quickly and you're just learning and soaking it in? Or was this like the constant longing through that 4 years that you were out there?
Probably more the latter. The Citadel, as I said, was a military school. And at the time, it was an all-male military school. It's co-ed now. And so, it was like going to boot camp. You show up in Charleston, South Carolina in August. So it's like 100 degrees and 100% humidity. You're sweating in the shower. I've got a bad knee. I'm here to play basketball. What do you mean? You're yelling at me. You're screaming at me. I'm doing push-ups. What the heck's going on? And seriously. And, I'm 1,000 miles away from home. And David, true story, I was going to quit. I'd never quit anything in my life. I fought back from having 3 knee surgeries in high school. And I was walking over to the field house to tell the coaches I was going to quit. I had no plan B. There was nothing I had no idea what I was going to do after that. But I thought before I go talk to the coaches, I'm going to see if I got any mail. And so I walk over and there's a letter from my father. My father had never written me a letter in my life. So I take the letter, I go to the field house, I go up into the nosebleed section, I tear open the letter, and I start reading. And it's a 7-page handwritten letter from my father that basically said, pull your head out of your butt. You have a tremendous opportunity here. You've got a 4-year ride to get a college degree and play Division I basketball. I know you're homesick, he said, but you've called home 7 times since you've been there, and not once have you asked how your mom's doing, how your grandmothers are doing, how your girlfriend's doing, how your friends are doing. You are so in your head right now. He said, you can do this, but you got to get out of your own way. And by the time I finished reading that letter, David, I was in tears. And I was probably 50 feet away from the coach's office. And I was like, I cannot quit, and I folded that letter up, took the handkerchief out of the back pocket, wiped my eyes, blew my nose, and went back and graduated 4 years later. So my dad's letter literally, I think, changed the trajectory in a lot of ways, saved my life.
Wow. Gave me goosebumps listening to that, Terry. That's a wonderful, wonderful story. So then you persevere, you don't quit, and you graduate college. And then because your dad wanted you to go into business, you decide that, hey, I'm going to go into business. And then did you move back to Chicago and start looking for a job? Or I don't know if there was like on-campus recruiting in Charleston that you found a gig down there?
I did not. Actually, my parents had moved back. I mentioned we spent a small amount of time in Ohio. My parents had moved back to Ohio right before my senior year at the Citadel. And so I did. I moved back home to find a job. David, I'm really going to date myself. Now, this was long before the internet was available, to help people find employment. And so it was literally, and I mean, I was a mess. I'd spent 4 years at the Citadel. We wore military uniforms and stuff like that. And now I've got to go out on job interviews. I don't own a suit. I tried to marry a navy blue sport coat with a navy blue pair of pants. And the guy I interviewed with, after the interview, basically said, you got to spend some money and buy an actual suit because these two don't go together. I mean, that's how kind of messed up I was. But I found a job as a field marketing trainee in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, like I said, in their marketing department. And that was kind of the heyday of fast food. So it was a great job. I wasn't making any money. My wife and I were talking about this. Our first job, I made $15,000 a year. She made $12,000 a year. And, you look, I mean, granted, in 1982, so, I mean, that money went a lot further. But I ended up living at home for the next 3.5 years because my father and my grandmother were both dying of cancer. So I was helping my mom care for them and then working at Wendy's.
Yeah, so that there's so much complexity there. So you just graduated, you have your first adult job working at Wendy's, but then at the same time, you have this like incredibly emotional backdrop with your grandmother and, based upon like how much of this airtime you've already given to your dad, how influential he is to you. Like, how did you balance that emotionally while trying to also show up and be present at work?
Yeah, terribly. I did not do a very good job of that at all. I mean, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. I mentioned my dad went to college, but he did not graduate. And my mom never went to college. So I was the first person in my family that actually graduated. And I'm all set to, make my mark on the world. I'm ready to get out there and make it happen. And then this happens. And I'm living at home. I'm sleeping in the same bed I slept in when I was in high school. I would get up every morning. I would go into my parents' room. I would empty my dad's urinal. I would take a shower, get dressed, go to work. And then at noon, I would come home and I would help my mom get my dad ready for work. And I would take him to his job, get him in his office, get back in the car, drive back to my job, and then at 5 o'clock, I'd go get him and bring him home and we'd get him undressed and get him into bed. And it was something I was not happy to do, but something I was very grateful to do. My parents, as I think I've alluded, we're a very close family. My parents gave everything to my brothers and I. And so now it's time for us to give back. And that's what I wanted to do. If it would have taken 30 years instead of 3.5 years, I would have done it for 30 years because that's what my parents were about. And I remember one specific story. My dad was doing chemo and he lost a lot of his hair, but he had taken a shower and I was helping him get into his pajamas and I was drying what little hair he had left. And he reached out his hand like he wanted to shake hands with me. And I was like, what are you doing? And so I shook his hand, and in the palm of his hand was $100 bill. And I'm like, what's this for? And he's like, well, that's thanks for everything you. And I put it back in his pajama pocket. I said, Dad, you make me feel like a prostitute. I said, don't ever do that to me again. I said, I'm doing this because I love you. I'm doing this because of everything you and Mom did for my brothers and I. Don't ever think, you have to pay me to do this. This is family. This is what family does for each other. And that's what I want to do for you. So don't ever make me feel like this again. And it's funny, David, I was like, man, the child has become the parent, in a lot of ways. And my dad, like I said, my dad was a big guy. He was 6'5", 250 pounds. And, he was a corporate executive. And I mean, he was somebody I looked up to and he was my hero. But that was a horrible time in my life. And I was trying to balance working, at my first job after college with the family dynamics that were going on. I'm not sure I did either one of them very well.
Wow. That's incredibly vulnerable, Terry. Thank you for sharing that. And then if we turn the page to the next chapter is then when your dad passed, do you immediately start thinking of a non-business role and go revisit that lost cause about when you were inspired by your grandfather to go into law enforcement? Or did you give it a few more chapters and say like, hey, this business stuff isn't too bad. Let me try a few more and see if it really sings to me?
The latter, actually. I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. I thought they did such a great job. I mean, we were in and out of the hospital with both of them for so many times, and everybody was amazing. Everybody was great. And I'm like, I'd like to be part of this organization. And when I left Wendy's, I was a new product marketing supervisor in the hospital. It's a fairly large hospital. It's about 1,100 beds, about 5,000 employees, excluding the medical staff. And they were looking for a new product marketing person. And I was like, man, that's right up my alley. And so I interviewed and I got the job at that point. And I was there for about 10 years. But there was always that sort of tug, that yearning of, yeah, it's a good job. I'm making decent money, but it's not what I'm supposed to be doing. It's not my purpose. And one of the things I'm most proud of in my life, David, is that I never let the dream die. I never said, okay, I'll be content to do this. And fortunately, I met my wife through the hospital. The hospital sent me through a leadership program through the Chamber of Commerce. My wife was in the same program, and that's how we met. We got married. We moved to Santa Barbara, California, and that's when I dipped my toe kind of in the water of law enforcement. There was a class that there was a circular that came in the mail from Santa Barbara City College. And if you took the class and passed it, you could apply to be a reserve police officer with any agency within the state. So you can imagine, my wife had married me when I was a suit and tie, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, hospital administrator. And I'm like, hey, hon, will you support me? And she did. Yeah, take the course, see what happens. And I got on with Santa Barbara PD, and that started my law enforcement career.
So let's talk about the law enforcement career, because it is such a big change for you. You became super specialized, right? A SWAT hostage negotiator. I would imagine, like, if you make a mistake, someone dies, right? I mean, in law enforcement, that happens probably in a lot of circumstances versus like pushing paper. But in that instance, the pressure is so high. So I would imagine there's a lot of specialized training. So I'm curious, like, how that arc bent to doing hostage negotiation.
Sure. So on a SWAT team, and for most organizations, the SWAT team are usually the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. And I've always wanted to be part of the best in my life. So when there was an opening on the negotiating team, and for those of your audience who don't understand SWAT, it's usually divided into two groups: the tactical team, which are the men and women that have all the toys, and then the negotiators. And we used to joke with the tactical team that as negotiators, if we did our job right, you didn't get to use all your toys and things like that. So there was an opening. And I mean, I was a 37-year-old rookie cop. So by the time I'm looking at SWAT, I'm like in my mid 40s, and there's a physical fitness component of it. You got to run a mile and a half. You got to, and I always stayed in shape, but I took a lot of Tylenol after that.
Yeah, for the knees, right?
Yeah. And there was the meeting with the psychologist. There was psychological exams you had to take, meeting with the command staff, and then meeting with the team. And it was an all or nothing with the team. I mean, if one person said, hey, I've worked with Terry, he's hard to work with, or he's difficult, or he's, moody or whatever, you didn't get on. And so I was lucky. I got the thumbs up from everybody and started that. And the way we trained, the way we learned is we did scenarios. We would read about something or hear about something, and then we do a scenario. And like I said, we had a psychologist that worked with us. So where you learn was in the debrief, where, he might say, hey, did you ever think this person was schizophrenic and off their medications? Like, oh, no, I never thought about that. And so it was kind of a trial and error. And I'll give you I keep giving you all these stories about what a knucklehead I was in life, but I was a knucklehead when I started this too. It was Terry, you're up. Okay, you're going to negotiate. It's a hostage and a hostage taker behind a locked door. Dave and I spent the entire time talking to the hostage. And afterwards, they were like, you do understand, we're trying to negotiate with the hostage taker to get the hostage out. I said, yeah, I figured that. I guess I got a lot to learn. So it was a big learning curve for me on that one.
So, Terry, I jotted down that you said that you wanted to be in the elite group of this law enforcement. Do you think that stems from your childhood because you were playing basketball, not just rec-wise, but at a very elite level, and that, I don't know, brought out the best of you or made you, there's some actualization that you felt great about being the best of the best?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's another thing, sports, if you take it seriously, if you work real hard at it, you're pushing yourself past your limit to make yourself better. There's a Theodore Roosevelt, it's a very long poem called The Arena, and it's about the person in the arena who, at the end of the competition basically is lying on the field of battle. You've given everything you have to the cause. And, it's a metaphor. But at the same time, you did that as an athlete. You're giving the best you can for your team, win or lose, doesn't matter. You're doing your very best. And absolutely, that was SWAT. We trained to be the best because, as you said, this is life and death. I mean, people may die, and people did die. I mean, we were successful about 90% of the time getting people out safely, but about 10% of the time, we're negotiating, say, with a homicide suspect that is caught. They know they're not going to get away. But they also know that when they come out, they're going to spend the rest of their life in prison. And they're like, no, I'm not doing that. And they would put one in their head and end their life. And while that was always tragic, and it absolutely is, anytime somebody dies, I'm going to sound really callous when I say this, I never lost any sleep over that because I knew I had great training. I knew I worked with great people. And I knew at the end, I'd done everything I could to try to get that person out safely. But it was really their decision how this was going to end.
And then, Terry, you had put this idea of following your grandfather's footsteps a little bit on the back burner out of respect for your father. And then when you turned that lost cause into unlost cause and you became not only a police officer, but the elite of the elite, how did that make you feel? Did you sleep better at night? Did you feel like you scratched that itch? Did you go around with more purpose? Or was it like, well, no big deal?
No, it was a big deal. Like I said, at 37, I started that journey. So there were a lot of years where I wasn't sleeping well. I knew, when you get up in the morning, I have a purpose, but it's not the purpose I think I'm supposed to do, the reason I was put here. And so when I got into law enforcement, I slept a lot better. I felt I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm doing what God has put me on this earth to do. And that's trying to help people, try to make a difference in people's lives. So yeah, I slept a lot better. I wanted to, you'd never know this from listening to me talk. I like to keep things close to the vest. I don't like to talk about myself or what I've done or what I think or what I feel. But when you do a podcast, you kind of have to open up. You kind of have to be vulnerable. You kind of have to be able to walk the walk and talk the talk. And so that was hard for me when I first started podcasting to put all this out there. It's like, hey, I made a bunch of mistakes and I'm going to tell you about them in the hopes that maybe you can make a difference or that I can make a difference in your life, that I can teach somebody something that might help them. And that's what I was in SWAT. It was trying to take people who, in all honesty, were probably having the worst day of their life. I mean, let's face it, if your house is surrounded by the police and you're talking to me, you're not having a good day. So, you're really not. So it was a matter of how can I try to get these people to see that is hope on the other side of what appears to be no hope whatsoever?
And then so it's great. You're following this career path that you love. You're sleeping better, and then there's a big turn that happened after you turned 50. I think at 51. So share with the audience, what started unfolding at that time.
Yeah, so 51 years old. I was out of law enforcement. My wife had always been the primary breadwinner in our family. She had lost her job and found another job, and we moved to Texas. And so I had to get out of law enforcement. And, I look at it like kind of the way I did with my parents. She had supported me to be part of something I felt I was supposed to do. Now it was my time to support her. And we moved to Texas. And I have a school security consulting business. I'm also coaching girls high school basketball. And it's during basketball season. I have a callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my third toe. And initially don't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a couple weeks of it not healing, I make an appointment and go see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he takes an x-ray and he says, Terry, I think you have a cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he does. And he shows it to me. It's just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it. No dark spots, no blood, nothing that gives either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sends it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I get the call from him. And as I said, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he's having explaining to me what's going on, the more frightened I am becoming until finally he just lays it out. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years and I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have an incredibly rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun, affects the melanin, the pigment in our skin. Mine has nothing to do with sun exposure. It's just a rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. Mine appeared on the bottom of my foot. And that started my 13-year odyssey through cancer.
Wow. So when he shared it with you, because I would imagine back then, it wasn't as easy as chatting with AI or doing all this research online. And we talked about the stages of when something big happens, it's like, hey, you don't believe it. And then you have to reconcile with it and, eventually make peace with it. To share with the audience, what did you do and how did you feel in the initial, maybe 24 hours after getting that call?
Sure. So yeah, my first call, and I remember exactly where I was. I was, as I said, a school security consultant. I was in the parking lot of a FedEx, having just sent a report to a school that I was working with, and the phone rings. And I thought, oh, great, this is going to be, 2-second conversation. I'm going to move on with my life. I get that news. And so first person I called was my wife. And, she was at work and it was, we'll get through this. And the second person I called was a 95-year-old friend of mine. He used to work out at a YMCA, and he and I became friends. And his daughter was a physician at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. She was an ocular cancer specialist. And because you're right, there was no, let's get on the computer and, there was no, I don't even think WebMD was available back then. So it was like, Bud, his name was Bud, I need to talk to Jade. I got to figure this out. But I know, and it probably took longer than 24 hours. I know, just like you said, I went through all the stages we would associate with grief. First it was denial, because when my dad was sick, it was like, I'm going to do everything right. I'm going to see my doctor every year. I'm going to have all the tests. I'm going to eat right. I'm not going to abuse alcohol, drugs, tobacco. I'd done everything right in my life. So first it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. And then there was anger. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then there was a bargaining kind of with God. Our daughter was in high school at the time. And it was like, all right, God, just let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I absolutely got down, got depressed, felt sorry for myself. And then I just came out the other end and was like, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. I do not like the cards I've been dealt, but I'm going to have to play these cards to the best of my ability. And when I was diagnosed, they told me, more than likely, you'll be dead in 2 years. And I thought, well, you gave me a death sentence. Maybe I can find a way to turn that death sentence into a life sentence. 13 years later, I'm still here.
Yes, and super full of vitality and energy, I would say. So then you get this sentence and you went through the stages and you're trying to make this bargain and they say 2 years on the timer or the shot clock. You got 2 years. Like, what did you decide to do next? And then how did that obviously elongate from, I don't know if you're in remission now or, you're just still on the edge from 2 to 13.
The reason they said 2 years is they said, we have nothing to offer you. There's no therapy. There's no drugs. There's nothing we can offer you other than surgery. So if something pops up where we can cut it out, we'll do that. But if it doesn't, we've got nothing. So we're going to put you on this drug called interferon, as my doctor used to say, to kick the can down the road. We're just trying to buy you more time for additional therapies to become available. And interferon for me, David, was a horrible, nasty, debilitating drug. I took a weekly injection. And I used to always say, okay, I know what's coming and I'm going to do this to myself. It wasn't like I had to go to the hospital and they did it for me. No, I'm going to do this to myself. And I had terrible flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having a terrible case of the flu every week for 5 years and knowing that this isn't a cure. This isn't, at the end of this, it's not going to stop. And I remember getting to a point where I was so sick of being sick that I literally prayed to die. It was like, okay, God, just take me, let me get out of here and let my family get on with their life. Because I felt there were sort of two camps. There was the living and the not dying. And I was absolutely in the not dying. I wasn't living. I was just literally surviving. If you would ask, what were your goals during that time? It's like, I don't know. It depends on whether I wake up tomorrow morning. I mean, sometimes a good day was literally getting out of bed and making it to the sofa, to the couch. I mean, that was a good day. And so it was horrible. And, you go through all that, and eventually the interferon became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a body temperature of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. I mean, I remember I was in the ER and they were working on me and they pulled my wife out. And my wife told me this later. She said, the nurse told me, she said, look, I've only seen 2 people ever in my career that have had a temperature this high, and neither one of them survived. So you probably ought to prepare yourself. So yeah, 5 years of interferon was the start of this.
So then after that ICU visit, did you decide to get off interferon, or was there a new medication that came out that you switched to, or did you, down ramp the dosage, or what happened after those 5 years?
No, my oncologist like, you're done with interferon. I mean, if we give you another dose, it'll probably kill you. So it's like, you can't have this anymore. So at the time, immunotherapy was starting to come out. And so they said, let's try immunotherapy. I took 4 rounds, and I don't even remember. It was a combination drug. If you gave me a while, I'd think of it, but I can't remember the name of it right now. And it really didn't do anything to blunt the cancer on the bottom of my foot. As a matter of fact, it gave me really bad side effects. I ended up with a blood clot in my lung, fluid around the sac of my heart. I had what was called pseudo gout, which were calcium crystals that were in my knee that were just, it was one of the most painful things I've ever experienced, all as a result of that medication, and it didn't do anything. So that's when I had my first amputation. They're like, we're gonna have to do a below the knee amputation. And I actually got lucky because my orthopedic surgeon was friends with a foot surgeon, and they got together and they're like, well, we can amputate your foot, but we can do it in such a way that if basically they left me my heel and my ankle and they took everything in front of that. And so instead of having a below the knee amputation, I had this, it's called the Liz Frank procedure. And so they took most of my foot off. I still had to learn how to walk again and, balance and all that kind of stuff. But it was much less traumatic than had I had a below the knee amputation.
So then that amputation it buys more time, or did it take the cancer out, or what was the result of that?
So yeah, I mean, they're like, yes, we will try this Liz Frank procedure. Going into it, they're like, we can't guarantee it because they have to get clean margins around the incision. And if we can't get clean margins, we're going to have to keep going. So we may have to give you a below the knee amputation, but we won't know that until we actually do the surgery. Fortunately, they were able to get clean margins. So, okay, you're cancer free. But what they don't, I mean, they do tell you, but what you have to understand is there's a thing called micrometastases, which are basically cells that they can't see. And I remember my doctor telling me, he said, we've got great technology, but we can still basically only see a tumor about the size of a garden pea, which is about 1 billion cells. Anything smaller, we're not real good at detecting. So there might be micrometastases in your body, which there were because this continued to spread. After I had the amputation of my foot, it worked its way up my shin. I ended up having 2 more surgeries kind of in my shin in 2019. And then in 2020, an undiagnosed tumor kind of in my ankle area grew large enough that it broke my leg. It fractured my tibia. And my only recourse, and that was right in the middle of COVID, my only recourse was to have my left leg amputated above the knee. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I still have tumors in my lungs, and I'm still being treated for today.
Wow. So then, Terry, I mean, it feels like a full-time job plus just to deal with that, remain positive, be a parent to your child. How do you start? But then in parallel, you start having these mindset shifts that allow you to maintain positivity that launch this motivational check. So now let's bounce the other side. Like, how do you have the energy and how is that starting to come to fruition?
Yeah, I guess let me sort of back up. I don't want your audience to think that, it's all sunshine and rainbows, because it's not. I mean, I have bad days. I get down. I feel sorry for myself. I spent 4.5 years on a clinical trial drug that I would go to the hospital every day for a week, every 3 weeks. And I would get this drug. And 2 hours after I got it, I would shake violently. I would throw up. I had a headache. I would sweat. I had a fever. It was just terrible. And I did that for almost 4 years. But it was working. It was keeping the tumors in my lungs at bay. And I'd been physical most of my life. And so it was like, okay, this is just like working out. I'm getting a heck of a workout. One of the nurses was like, you know what? We should figure out how many calories you burn during all this reaction, to your medicine and stuff like that. And David, I guess, let me say this. So, I'm 6'8", I'm 235 pounds. When I used to walk into a room before I had my leg amputated and everything, everybody would stare. Everybody would turn and look. Now, I don't have a left leg and I'm in a wheelchair. So when I come into a room, people also stop and stare and look. But I think it's incumbent upon me now to try to put those people at ease. And I try to do that through humor. I try to do that through, stupid dad jokes that I tell and things like that. And I'm a human being, just like you are. I'm different. Yes, absolutely. I have different challenges and things but I want to have connections. I've done so many things physical in my life, and now I'm in a wheelchair and I don't have a left leg. So how do you balance those two? And I think when you can't do what you're good at, you do what's important in life. And that's what I'm doing now. And, I'm not making any money. But I'm making a difference in people's lives. And it's that connection for me now that is so important. I mean, I've had people say, if you could live your life without cancer again, would you do it? I wouldn't, David. Cancer has made me a better human being. And it's made me a better human being because of those connections. And there's a psychology professor at the University of Chicago who does this experiment with his students. And the idea is you go out and get on a bus, and in 3 questions, you go deep with somebody. So you sit down next to somebody, hey, how you doing? I'm fine, how are you? Question 1, and I'm just making this up. Question 2, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a doctor. Question 3, have you always wanted to be a doctor? It doesn't matter what they say. They could say, no, I grew up on a farm. I wanted to be a veterinarian, but X, Y, and Z happened. Or no, my mother was a doctor, but she died of breast cancer when she was 40. So I'm honoring her memory by being a doctor. Whatever they tell you, they're telling you their why, their mission, their purpose in life. That's what energizes me now. I love talking to people, asking them about their why in life.
And I remember when I was prepping for our chat today about you wouldn't do anything different, and you would, if you had this fork in the road, you would go down cancer-free or go through the same thing. You would choose the cancer route. What would you say to those other people who are either in the same vein as you, who are suffering, and be like, you're crazy? Or other people who are angry because they've lost someone, a loved one. Like, how have you been able to radically shift your mindset so much, Terry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I look at this journey, David, as something that's bigger than me. I've always said what's gotten me through cancer are my 3 Fs, which are faith, family, and friends. And I believe now that God is using me to show people his love, his mercy, his caring, his healing. And that's good for me. I mean, when I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend a lot of time worrying about, the dying part of it. spend much more focusing on the living. And like I said, I have bad days. I have days when, I'm feeling sorry for myself. I'm feeling down. I'm feeling depressed. But when I have those days, I'm looking inward. I'm looking at, woe is me. Look how terrible this is. And yeah, don't get me wrong. It's hard many, many times. But I find a very easy way to flip that for me is to go find somebody. I've made a ton of friends that have cancer through these 13 years. Is either pick up the phone and call, hey, how you doing? How you feeling today? What's going on? Now all of a sudden I'm focused on somebody else. Or if I'm sitting in the infusion center waiting room, and you can sort of tell the newbies, they come in, they sit down, they kind of got the deer in headlights look. They're scared. Is this going to be effective? How much is it going to hurt? Am I going to die? All the questions that we've all asked throughout our cancer journey. And I find it at least a healing way for me, and usually for them, is just that kind of wheel over and say, hi, I'm Terry. What's your name? I'm Bob. Oh, how you doing, Bob? Now all of a sudden, the person feels seen, that I'm not a cancer patient. I'm Bob. And Terry sees Bob. That Terry doesn't see a cancer patient. And I always tell them, these are the best nurses and therapists in the world. They are going to take great care of you. You're going to be good. And there's just kind of a weight, a burden that's lifted off of them. That's like, okay, I'm ready to do this. So, I'm just trying to make a difference with the people I can. I can't make a difference in the whole world. I can try to make a difference in my little piece of it.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And Terry, you talk about your 4 truths, right? And I think that's a major message that you have. Can you share with the audience what are your 4 truths and how you came about, how they came to you, and then how do you live that?
Yeah, I mean, the story of how they happened is kind of funny because I was on a podcast called The 3 Truths, and I was like, well, I better figure out, and I did. It wasn't just kind of flippant. I came up with these. It was, I need to think about this. I want to have something good. I want to be a good guest. So what are my truths? And I came up with these 3 truths, and then I added a 4th one. And I was really hesitant to add the 4th one because as humans, we like things in 3s. But I really felt the 4th one was so important that I needed to add it. And I have them on a Post-it note here in my office. So I see them multiple times during the day and they constantly get reinforced. And so I'll just give them to you. They're 1 sentence each. The first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third one, and this is the one that I added, I look at it kind of as a legacy truth. And it's what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the 4th one, I think is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I call these 4 truths kind of the bedrock of my soul. I just think they're a good place to start to try to build a quality life off.
First, they all resonate. But one thing that came to my mind when you were sharing that is, controlling your mind, embracing the pain and make you stronger. And then let me hold on to the 3rd one, weaving the heart. And then the 4th one is as long as you don't quit, you can't be defeated. Those 3, I see like strong relations to your athletic endeavors as a child and then in college, and then your determination through the academy and then the law enforcement profession. Now, the 3rd one, understanding what you leave behind, is woven into people's hearts. Am I right to say that it feels like it came later, or was there a epiphany, or was that always part of it and we just didn't talk about it as much?
No, I think you're right. I think the first 3 you mentioned are more of a byproduct of the life that I've led. And then when I got cancer and you start to face your own mortality and you want to, what am I leaving behind? What am I going to be remembered for? And I've been asked the question, how do you want to be remembered? I don't. I don't want to be remembered. I'm not going to be remembered. 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember I was here. And I'm fine with that. Because like I said, I don't care about how I'm remembered. What I care about more are the connections that I have right now. So yeah, you're right. That final one was more of I'm facing my own mortality. What can I leave behind?
Yeah. And then, so now on the professional side, you're doing podcasts and interviews like what we're doing here on Lost Cause. You're also speaking and doing a lot more in the media. Is that correct?
I am. I wrote a book. My second book is about ready to come out. I've written a final chapter in a third book, and I've been quoted and featured in two other books. So, and again, never in my life, if you would have told me, I gave you sort of my academic career, not a stellar student by any means, but to be able to do those things, I'd always been good in English and things like that, but never in my life did I ever expect to write a book.
And the first book, was that Sustainable Excellence?
Correct.
Okay. So can you share with the audience, what was the first book? And if you're willing, the book that is about to come out, what is that book going to be about?
Yeah, so the first book, Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. There's kind of an old joke that says, when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God has never, spoken to me and said, hey, Terry, write a book. But I think what God has done is put enough people in my path that start making the same suggestion over and over. And I'm old enough and probably mature enough now to I gotta pay attention to that. So Sustainable Excellence was really a book born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who had moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. David, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason or the reasons you were put on the face of this earth. And there is a reason. Using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. And then the other conversation was a young man in college who reached out to me on social media. And he said, what do you think are the most important things I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others. I didn't want to give him sort of cliches that we all know. So I spent some time and I was taking some notes and I kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally during the 4 to 5 month period I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the 10 principles. And that's how Sustainable Excellence came to be. And the second book, which should be out later this year, is called 4 Truths and a Lie. And it's really a book, as soon as I finished Sustainable Excellence, I kind of felt there was another book in me. Sustainable Excellence is about success, how I think people can be successful in life. But I felt there was another book that also began with the letter S, another word that began with the letter S, and that was significance. And significance is how we make an impact or a difference in other people. And so it was like, okay, I need to write this book. But, cancer kind of kept getting in the way. I'm on this 4 years of this drug and I'm kind of a mess. I'm tired. I'm sick all the time. And it was a 1.5 year long process of taking the 4 truths that we just talked about and then adding a lie to it, which is kind of I'm not going to tell you what the lie is, kind of the right, it's kind of a misconception. Yeah. In that. So 4 Truths and a Lie should be out later this year.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. So Terry, for the first book, Sustainable Excellence, there's 10 principles. When you speak on that, which one gets the audience most engaged? And were you surprised that it was going to be that principle, or were you not surprised at all?
I guess, there kind of is one, but it really is kind of all over the board. And it's always fun for me when somebody reads it and they reach out, because there's always one of the 10 that's like, this is the one that really resonates with me. But the one that a lot of people talk about, and one, in all honesty, the problem is the one that hits home the hardest for me is, I believe it's the second one. And it's, most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And David, I know I've done that many times in my life, that, you want to start a project, you want to start a business, you want to get involved in something, and you sort of pull back. You're like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't have enough information, or what will people say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And whenever I have an opportunity to talk to young people, especially, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be the things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
Yeah, then it becomes that lost cause. So, given all you're doing with this backdrop of cancer, how have others shared with you, Terry, how they have seen you change and your kind of determination, your perseverance, and your accomplishments also impacted them?
I guess let me answer that with a story. When I started getting this infusion drug that I mentioned that I was on for 4 years, there was a young nurse who had just come to the unit. She was about 25 years old. She was already a nurse, but she was being precepted and taught how to do things on the unit. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came in and she said, Terry, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I'm not sure how to tell it to you. And David, I was like, how do I respond to that? What do you say when somebody says something like that to you? And I'm like, I said, well, I hope you decide you want to tell me because I think I would enjoy hearing that. That's all I could come up with. And so she's in and out for the next couple hours. And then she comes in, she sits down, she's like, all right, here's the story. She said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I'd had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a very dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I met you and I see what you go through. I described, the repercussions that I have from my medication. And she said, you keep coming back. No matter how bad it is, you're going to be here the next day. And she said, then when I was taking care of you, I went in your chart and I started to read everything you've been through, your foot amputated, your leg amputated, the 5 years of interferon and things like that. And she said, when I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, David, I would have had no idea that my life had such an impact on this very young lady. And I would say to your audience, anybody who's out there who thinks that your life doesn't matter, that what you're going through isn't important, I can promise you, there are people watching how you handle your adversity in life and would give almost everything they have just to walk 5 minutes in your shoes. So don't ever think that no matter what you're going through, doesn't matter. It absolutely does. And there are people watching you.
Amazing. And then, Terry, it sounds like you're very introspective and thoughtful. So you just shared how you've impacted others by going through this, trying yet poignant chapter. How has that changed how you think about self? And have you given yourself time to kind of digest that?
Like I said, I think this is bigger than me. So I don't really try to put it in terms of myself. It's like I'm being used. I'm being used by what I believe is my God, my creator, to help other people for however long I'm supposed to be here. I mean, you think about it, I was supposed to be dead after 2 years in 2012, and it's been over 13 years and I'm still here. And I've seen so many people, everybody who was on that clinical trial drug with me here at the University of Colorado, unfortunately has passed away and I'm still here. And I think I'm here because I'm being used by our creator. And that's the only way I can describe it. This is something that's so much bigger than me that I can't even fathom, the impact I'm having on people. You've got so much energy. How can you possibly be doing that? I mean, I don't feel good a lot of times, but when I guest on podcasts with people like you and things like that, it gives me energy. It gives me purpose. It makes me feel better than sitting, in a chair and saying, oh, woe is me and stuff like that. So can I tell my story and can I make a difference? I hope so. That's really what this is all about for me.
And so you just mentioned that the other folks in the trial have all passed on and you're the lone person that's going strong. Do you believe that your ardent kind of belief that, there's a bigger purpose has enabled you to keep going forward? And if you didn't have that belief, do you think that you would be part of like the statistics of, unfortunately, those other people who have passed on?
I do. I mean, I think one of the biggest questions I asked myself when I got cancer was, do you want to live? And that seems like a real simple question. Well, of course you want to live. I can promise you, a lot of people answer that question no. I mean, I was told I would be dead in 2 years. I was not going to take the prediction of a doctor who didn't know me and say, okay, I'm going to die in 2 years. However, I have seen people that have been told you'll be dead in 2 years, literally die on the 2-year anniversary that doctor told them. That wasn't going to be me. And I think part of the reason why, and I'm going to say this, and this is this is no shot at my doctors. I have the most amazing doctors in the world. But I think a lot of time, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Doctors are kind of like bookies. They look at you and say, based on your age, based on your overall health, and based on the type of cancer and the stage that it's at, you're probably going to live X, whatever that is, months, years, whatever. But what doctors don't know, and sort of the X factor in all this, is that you want to see your daughter graduate from high school. You want to see your daughter graduate from college. You want to walk your daughter down the aisle. You want to play with your grandkids. And having something to look forward to is so important in your life. Having something to live for other than yourself. I mean, my faith is a huge part of what I live for as well. But it's also wanting all those things. And I've done that. You know, I watched my daughter graduate from high school. I watched my daughter graduate from the United States Air Force Academy and shake hands with the President of the United States. I've walked my daughter down the aisle on her wedding day. The only thing I haven't done yet is play with my grandkids because I don't have any grandkids yet. So I have things to look forward to. And I think that's a big part of why people survive.
Certainly. I think there's that adage, you have to have something to do, something to believe in, and something to look forward to really get going. And when you think back about where you are today, are you proud of your journey?
Am I proud of my journey? I've never been asked that question before. I am. I think I've handled it the best I could. I made a decision very early on when I got cancer that I was never going to take out my pain, my bad mood, my whatever, on a doctor, on a nurse, on a therapist, on somebody that was trying to help me. One of the stories I put in my new book, when I have my infusions, the first thing I have to do is get blood. And that's usually at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I usually open the lab with the receptionist. And I always ask her, I usually start on a Monday. So how was your weekend? What did you do? And we kind of developed a relationship. And she said to me one day, you're always kind to me. You're always asking me about my family or what I did over the weekend and things like that. And I said to her, well, just based on the way you asked that question to me, I get the impression that other people aren't kind to you. And she's like, no. She said, people are mean. People are, they yell at me. They get upset with me. They're short with me. And I tried to get her to say, I said, did you ever think of maybe looking at, it's sort of the difference between perspective and perception. Your perspective is based on, it's germane to you. It's based on everything that's happened to you in your life. And it's great, but it's only about you. Perception is more about, can you walk in the other person's shoes? Can you see what maybe they're going through? And maybe take into account that these people are here to get blood work that may determine they have to have surgery, or that there's nothing more medical science can do for them and they may die, or that, they just don't feel good. And so you're the closest person and they're taking it out on you. Maybe look at it like it's not you, but what a great opportunity you have to brighten their life, to smile at them, to call them by their first name, to, again, have them be seen as more than just a cancer patient, but as Bob or Tom or Dave or Terry or whoever, and that kind of thing. And you could tell sort of the light bulb went on with her. I mean, she was pretty young, but you could, it was like, oh, I never thought about looking at people that way.
No, that's wonderful. And Terry, for listeners who have a lost cause and they're over 40 and they've been thinking about doing it, hemming and hawing, or maybe they're just stuck or feeling they're too old to don't have this, don't have that, things haven't lined up for them, what would you tell them, or what piece of advice would you give them?
I guess I would say yet. Everything you just said, it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't lined up yet. You're right. I don't know, what was I, almost 60 years old when I wrote my first book. There are a lot of people. Colonel Sanders started Kentucky Fried Chicken after he retired. He was like 65 when he started that thing. So don't ever think that you're too old, or that there's nothing you can do, or that you can't stop. And let me tell you this story, and it's a true story. I'm back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University here in the United States. There was a professor there by the name of Richter, and he was doing an experiment with rats. Yeah, I'm going to tell a rat story, so sorry. It's like, but it's a true story. So he's looking to see how long the average rat could tread water. So he sticks a bunch of rats in a tank, of water over their head. And the first time around, the average rat treads water for about 15 minutes, and then they sink and drown. And yes, this is very cruel, but remember, it happened back in the 50s. So then he takes those rats out, takes another group of rats, sticks them in the exact same tank of water, but he watches them carefully this time. And just as those rats are getting ready to sink and drown and give up, he reaches in, grabs them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took those exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that, 15 minutes. It's not like you're going to flunk a test or your business is going to go under, or your marriage is going to fail. You're going to die. Second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. That if we know we're doing the right thing, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but if we know we're doing the right thing, there's a really good chance that somewhere down the road, you're going to get to where you want to be in life. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. And don't get me wrong, I think we all have a breaking point, but that breaking point is so much further down the road. And the reason it's so much further down the road, and I'm going to bring this back to the first truth of controlling your mind, is because your brain starts telling you, this hurts, it's uncomfortable, it's difficult, quit, give up, stop. And we do. Don't do that. We know from marathon runners that they hit a wall, but if they can push through that wall, they get a second win and they can go on. Just because your brain's telling you to stop or you don't think you can do it, don't listen to your brain. Keep pushing forward.
Fantastic. And one question that I love to ask guests is, what ask would they have of the Unlost Cause community? And, I've gotten some great responses, and I know that you're super inspirational. So I'm curious, what ask would you have of listeners in the community?
Let me give you this piece of advice. And this is another piece of advice I wish I would have learned when I was younger. I think it's more important who you work with and who you work for than it actually is the work that you do. Find people in your life that care about you. Find people in your life that are willing to invest in you. Find people in your life that want to see you succeed. Hitch your wagon to those people and climb your mountains together.
That's wonderful. And then for those who are inspired and touched by watching you like I am, how can they learn more about Terry Tucker or follow your journey or, get ready for the second book coming out? So all the socials, websites, email newsletters, this is the time to share them.
Sure. The easiest way to do is to go to motivationalcheck.com, which is my website blog. My social media links are on there. Access to the books are on there. You can leave me a message. It's sort of one-stop shopping for Terry Tucker. It's just an easy way to do it. So just go to motivationalcheck.com.
Great. So Terry, your story is a powerful reminder that meaning can be found even in the moments that hurt the most. By sharing your four truths and your unwavering mindset, you've given others permission to rise, heal, and lead with heart. You're living proof that as long as we don't quit, we can never be defeated. And I've never said this, but you asked me earlier and you talked about how you ask people questions. And I felt that at the very beginning. And you asked me, why do you do this? And part of my selfish reason is I get to have these one-on-one conversations with inspiring, amazing people. And I certainly felt touched that despite what you are going through, your positivity is infectious. So thank you so much, Terry, for being on Unlost Cause today.
Well, David, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Before you go, if you're inspired and want to be a part of something bigger, subscribe, like, and share to help more people reclaim their dreams and live true to themselves. Also, let me know if you or someone you know would be an inspiring guest on this show. Together, let's spark courage to live without regrets. The Unlost Cause way, one story and one person at a time.